So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second of 3 workshops from the AHSN Bridging the Gap events. Today's session is entitled Implementing Digital and Artificial Intelligence Technologies. I'm Louise Jopling, the Commercial Director at Eastern AHSN, and we're incredibly proud to welcome you to this workshop. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and will be used to support post-event materials. To ask any questions during the session, please use the Q&A function. We will have some introductions from each of our panel members, and then we will open it up very much for that interactive Q&A session. So hold off your questions until around 10:30, when everybody will have introduced themselves and their expertise. Do please, if you see a question that is related to what's in your mind, do please upvote those by ticking the thumbs up icon, and then we can make sure that that's a way in which we prioritise and triage the questions, those that are frequently liked or upvoted. And post-event materials will be shared in the next few days. The overall workshop objectives are to provide innovators such as yourselves the opportunity to interact with leaders from across our health and care sector and across industry, and that's both large and small industry, to share those experiences in how to overcome barriers and challenges of getting your digital and AI technology adopted and to patients, and primarily to receive practical advice to support the development and implementation of the technologies you are working on. Before I introduce the panelists, I would just like to spend a couple of moments introducing those of you less familiar or perhaps missed our plenary session yesterday morning around the work of the AHSNs. The AHSNs are funded by NHS England and the Office for Life Sciences, and there are 15 across the whole of England, locally distributed, and act as a broker between the NHS and industry. We work locally with each AHSN embedded within their regional health and care sector, and also nationally by using the power of all 15 of us coming together, providing a unique network of networks and collaborative opportunities for scaling and adopting novel technology. At Eastern AHSN, we, as with the other 14 AHSNs, we support innovators such as yourself navigate the complex NHS and systems to ultimately generate value. And we tend to focus most of our engagement around helping innovators to really implement their technology within the health and care sector to ultimately lead to impact for the system, patients, the population, and the economy. We support in a number of ways, identifying the healthcare needs in our geographies and communicating that demand to innovators such as yourselves, so you can help bridge that gap quite literally, signposting you to experts either within our organisations or within our networks, brokering real-world validation, and ultimately supporting adoption and spread. And at any point along this innovation pathway where you may be at a number of those points, we have either our own in-house expertise or expertise within our networks to support you on that journey. And my last slide before I hand over to our panelists is really just in the last financial year, the impacts that the AHSN network as a collective demonstrated, with in excess of 2,500 companies supported by our AHSNs, leading to almost 600 jobs created and almost 500 jobs safeguarded, and leveraging the in excess of £300 million of investment. So I'm going to pause there and introduce you to my panel members, who I hope will turn on their cameras, and you'll get to hear from them with respect to their background and experience. And if I could encourage you to hold off your questions as you hear from each of those, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session. So if I may, I will hand over to Peter Bannister, who is, has a number of roles, but particularly as Executive Chair of the Healthcare Sector for the Institute of Engineering and Technology. Peter, could I ask you to introduce yourself, and I will advance your slides.
Thanks, Louise, and hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to contribute today. So I guess my main challenge is to try and disentangle the various roles that I've got listed against my name. But to be honest, the reason for listing all of those is something that I'm very passionate about, is engineers being able to communicate and collaborate effectively with all of the other important people who sit across the healthcare spectrum, so that the solutions that they come up with and help progress towards clinical use are practical, effective, timely, and have a real impact at scale. And so to do that, I believe that you need to be able to communicate effectively with others, and also communicate to them all the role of engineers and also the role of others in terms of bringing real innovation and delivering real clinical value from it. My background as an individual, I trained in medical imaging and machine learning, as I sometimes say, quite a long time ago, before it became things like AI became trendy again, so a good 15 years ago. But since then, I've worked in industry and worked on quite a wide range of technologies, things from microwave radar for breast cancer screening through to high voltage electronics for surgical devices, as well as software-based systems, including things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And having had that broad experience, I've got to see the common factors in the kind of validation that's needed to prove to clinical users and patients that the technology you're bringing to bear is of practical value. And I think having that general view is helpful when looking at what could still be argued to be a fairly new technology in healthcare in the name of artificial intelligence. If we could move on to the next slide. I guess while we do that, one of the other roles I have is working alongside Dan as chair of one of the NHSX AI award panels. So I get to see and hopefully support a lot of innovation coming through with help from the NHS. So the Institution of Engineering and Technology then is, they're one of the professional engineering institutions in the UK, so sitting alongside organisations like the Institute of Mechanical Engineers and the Institute of Civil Engineers. But the IET is a very broad institution. We cover everything from digital through to electronics through to comms. And that puts us in a very good position with our members to be able to help take a more holistic view on some of healthcare's challenges. So what does a healthy built environment look like? That's going to involve the construction industry, energy, transport, etc. We also accredit the UK's biomedical engineering degree courses. We're a standards institution, so the electrical wiring standards that are used worldwide are published by the IET, so we have a role around regulation. And we also recently launched a program called Health Work Care Networks, which provides vocational support embedded within NHS organisations for the engineers who are working within NHS trusts. We're also very ardent champions around STEM, including things like digital skills training. So we work closely with Health Education England and the NHS Digital Academy to deliver technical content, digital content, skills content to healthcare professionals as that becomes relevant to their day job. So in terms of the design process, I mean, one of the ways that I describe the IT is we've got an inward-facing role. We need to educate engineers about what their job is and where they can play a part, but also an outward-facing, talking to the public, other stakeholders and policymakers about where engineering has a real chance to make an impact. So when we look at the design process, we see it's an iterative process, and it's really built around evidence and validation. And that provides numerous clear opportunities where people other than engineers, the real users, the clinical stakeholders, people in the NHS should and can be contributing and making sure that the right questions are being asked and the right answers are being found. And again, it's an iterative process. So once you've got a device, whether it's AI or something else, you have the opportunity to keep monitoring it and improving it based on more and more understanding. So the message that we give to engineers and I give to engineers is be led by the user. Don't come up with some cool technology and then look a bit downhearted because you can't find a home for it. And also make sure that you don't hide behind jargon. You're going to get the best collaboration if people understand what you're talking about. And if you see me using jargon, please call me up on it. I will try and avoid it. If we can move on to the next slide then. So, you know, we probably all know all of the range of stakeholders. The point here I wanted to make is, you know, there are opportunities to be very collaborative. As I said before, the panel that I'm lucky enough to chair at the IET is actually designed from the ground up to try and be a microcosm of the kind of people that are involved in the real development and adoption of clinical medical devices. So we have representatives from UKRI, the AHSNs, as well as clinicians, people who've been involved in procurement and the investment community, so that we can tell engineers what they need to do and how they need to communicate with these groups. one of the key things here, and at the risk of, there's this phrase co-design, and I do want to explain it. The idea that as you come up with the design, you should be talking to the users and helping them test out your ideas early on, rather than coming up with an idea and then trying to push it through a very formal and rigid development process. And probably all of us have heard more about things like agile, so iteratively building things, testing, retesting, and then adapting. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll probably be familiar with a couple of really strong examples over the last 12 or so months, where we've all heard in the news about how engineers from quite unusual fields, such as Formula One, have lent their efforts and their expertise to the kind of the immediate problems that we've all faced during COVID. And we all know that techniques such as artificial intelligence and data have been used to really bootstrap a lot of the vaccine development as well. But it's also been a real openness from the regulators that has meant that we've got to where we have in such an unprecedentedly rapid timescale. If we can move on again. Last bit, and apologies, a bit of a plug, but again, the whole point of being able to explain to engineers as well as the public and other clinical stakeholders what the problems are they need to focus on has meant that we've come up with a podcast called The Evidence Space. Easy to find. It's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, any other podcast providers I believe are available. But the idea is it's meant to explain to engineers the kind of evidence that clinicians and other stakeholders are looking for, and vice versa, explain to others who aren't engineers what the kind of things engineers can help them with are. So if you have time, I hope you'll have a time to check it. The episodes are very short, but they're again meant to give a flavor, and you can also hear what engineers are being told. And I think it's important. If you think they're being given the wrong message, there's an opportunity for the IT and others to help give them that right information. So I hope that background, really, it's about design and evidence is where I'm coming from on this, and hopefully some be able to answer some of the questions that come up later today.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And I can vouch for those podcasts. So thank you very much. We're going to move over to representation from large industry, so from GE Digital Services, Andy Cachaldora. But Andy's got a wealth of experience in this space. So Andy, without further ado, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Louise. I lead digital business for GE, but my background is more broader than GE. I've come from experience of developing AI both in primary and secondary care, and the focus has been primarily on how do you provide the correct clinical signatures for developing AI, but more importantly, how do you actually commercialize AI and make sure that it's fit for purpose, so the adoption is taken by the NHS, and also how do you develop the evidence so that you could scale up across an ICS from that perspective. In addition to that, specifically within GE, I'm responsible for leading the AI developments within the market. That's pixelated and non-pixelated AI. We have a Edison accelerator program where we work with NHS partners and industry, SMEs, etc., who are developing AI in a lab, so that we bring industry and NHS quite closely together to bridge the gap between what is being developed from an engineering perspective, but more importantly, how does that meet the need of customers, and actually providing the governance and security around bringing those to market, and more importantly, scaling up from that perspective. And that is very much in a vendor neutral way, so you're not dependent on specifically GE systems from that perspective. It's to accelerate quality AI into the NHS and private healthcare market from that perspective. In terms of experience beyond that, I've worked with many startups in terms of trying to obtain funding. In addition to that, also about scaling across the continent. So engaging with Department of International Trade, etc., and how you may think about other markets and where the market opportunities are. So, for example, where would you potentially commercialize your business after the NHS, and where the need is from that perspective, so you know the investments that you're making in growing your business are in the right area from that perspective. So that's me, Louise. Hopefully that was a short introduction.
That's fantastic. That's a lot of information there, Andy. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming through. So if I could just start now with, we've got two SMEs represented, starting off with Rudy Benfredj, who's founder and CEO of Mendelian. Rudy, could you give your intro, please?
Yeah, hey Louise, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for attending. So yeah, I'm on the SME side. I'm a computer scientist by background. My co-founder was a doctor, a neurologist, and then we started this company about almost 5 years ago together. We look at rare disease diagnosis, trying to diagnose patients as early as possible. And so we take a population health kind of digital approach by looking at medical records at scale and creating disease diagnostic models to match the criteria and find these patients as early as possible. We mostly operate in the primary care at the moment. And I think I'm probably a good use case of what Louise was talking about before around how the AHSN has brokered the relationship between the NHS and us. So, after developing the technology for 3 years, about 2 years ago, we managed to kind of get a foot in the NHS and we started to provide our solutions prospectively rather than the retrospective things that we had been doing for so long. And so today we cover a couple of nice areas around the UK. We have about almost 1 million patients that we have access to scan and to look for rare disease patients in that pool. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to telling you more maybe about how we got there, and also what we learned through the way. It's a constant a challenge and struggle, and I think every SME will always tell you that. But obviously, right? Like I remember attending some of these bridging the gap events, and I remember the emphasis on evidence and how much it's important, and that's really the key to it. I think that's usually what I like to say. The NHS is a big, stringent organizations for good reasons, and you're not going to hack your way around it, right? It's very clear there are boxes to tick, and it's a human kind of communication business at the end of the day. You're in front of people who want these boxes to be ticked, and if they tell you what you need to do, you just have to do the work and come back. And I think these kind of iterations that we've had through the years with where's your health economics, where's your ethics, where's your papers, has I think been really key to managing to finally get in. So yeah, looking forward to chatting more in the Q&A. Thanks for having me, Louise.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Rudy. Already lots of questions in my mind as well, and we work closely together. I'd like now to turn to Mark Lomax, who's an NIA Fellow and CEO of PEP Health. Mark, your intro, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'm a doctor by background and have been a clinical entrepreneur for probably about the last 20 or so years. My first venture into the entrepreneur world was developing a hospital at home system of being able to support hospital patients out in the community. And now great to see that it's largely sort of across most trusts in the NHS, but it was certainly sort of my first go at trying to transform healthcare in one way or another. And that's really my underlying passion with what I do day in, day out, is trying to change and improve healthcare with an innovative mindset applied to it. I've been the CEO of PEP Health now for about the last 18 months. And we went to market with our solution just as COVID was starting. We have an AI solution that listens to patients and what they say and converts that into a variety of insights for a variety of healthcare users to make sense of. At the moment, we're collecting data about every single hospital in the UK. We collect about 1 million comments per month, and we are then able to use our natural language processing tools to see in real time what's happening and benchmark trusts against each other, and have started to really unlock a variety of really interesting insights that patient data is able to show. It's been through COVID, so sort of a really interesting time to launch a business, as many of you might be thinking of as well, and the challenges that that creates. And so there's, I suppose, both commercially and technologically, sort of thinking flexibly about what we can do and how we bring things to market. It was great for us to be on the NHS Innovation Accelerator, which we've sort of been on for the last year. And that, alongside a number of the AHSNs that we work with, have been a really helpful way of us sharing our knowledge, building up our evidence base that it works, and publishing some of that data. So we've had a couple of reports that have been really well received, and especially with the dynamism within healthcare at the moment, sort of really makes it a really interesting time when there's hopefully additional insights that can be offered to really help people. So that's myself. Looking forward to the questions coming through, Louise.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. And I'm now going to turn, last but not least, to Dan Bamford, who's Deputy Director of the AI Award at NHS England and NHS Improvement. Dan, I'll advance your slides if you give me the cue.
Brilliant, thanks, thanks Lou, and great to be invited to speak to the group today. I'm Dan Bamford. I lead the AI in Health and Social Care Award. I sit within a group called the Accelerated Access Collaborative, which is hosted by NHS England, but brings together the NHS, government and industry to try and smooth the path for innovators across different classes of technology, and AI is an important emergent technology that we're doing a lot of thinking about. The AAC works really closely with NHSX in the AI space, and the award that I oversee sort of sits between the AAC and NHSX, and hopefully brings the best of both worlds in terms of general kind of innovation expertise sitting within the AAC, and then the digital expertise that resides within NHSX and the AI lab that sits within it. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Lou. So talking specifically about the AI award, it's a £140 million research fund that basically kind of signals the intent of the UK to support AI and position the UK as a leading destination for AI developers and innovators globally. The funding we have is made available over 4 years. We'll come to the end of the first year, and we do the funding round through a competitive process that has 4 cycles, of which we're currently in the 2nd cycle. The fund sits within the broader work of the NHS AI lab, who kind of think through ethical, regulatory, strategic issues related to the adoption and use of AI, with a view to making sure that the UK gets kind of early access to promising technologies, but deploys them in a safe and ethical way. And this all sits as part of a broader sort of macroeconomic and kind of industrial policy vision of positioning the UK as a leading destination for AI developers, entrepreneurs, funders in this space, academics and researchers. Next slide, please, Lou. And the way we sort of try and deliver against that vision is through kind of 3 key pillars related to the award. The first is, unsurprisingly, as a research fund, our ability to identify and select through our competitive process technologies who we think are going to make a really kind of significant contribution against the main strategic priorities laid out in the NHS long-term plan and other documents that highlight key clinical or operational pain points where AI can support us. The second area, and this kind of comes back to comments that Peter, Rudy and others have already mentioned around evidence base, that the second key area for us is helping build expertise in the UK around how does one, in real world settings, evaluate AI technologies to provide a platform for those technologies to be deployed at scale across the NHS, to do so with a really clear, compelling evidence base that covers accuracy and safety, health economics, the kind of detailed understanding how it deploys into real world pathways and human and workforce interactions related to that. And through the award, we're commissioning a number of large-scale multi-year evaluations where we think the legacy of those will be specific groups within the NHS who have a long kind of case history of doing AI evaluation, and who'll be really well placed to support future waves of AI companies who want to work with really strong evaluation teams who can help build evidence bases that will be useful for deployment, but also useful for marketing purposes, both in the UK and abroad. And then lastly, as we fund research through the award and help shape and design that research in line with emerging best practice around AI clinical design and reporting. Once we start seeing the results of that that real world evidence that proves the generalizability, the non-inferiority or superiority of these technologies, we then think about how do we quickly take them from being a proven technology with appropriate evidence, with appropriate NICE guidance or Public Health England support, to a position where they can actually deploy at scale and have a suitable procurement commissioning framework that supports a sustainable business model for the entrepreneurs, a lot of whom are SMEs, although we also welcome the larger players too. Great CGE on the panel. So in bucket 3, there's a host of challenges which can be quite bespoke to particular pathways, and that's where the role of the AAC, Accelerated Access Collaborative, comes in, because we've seen a number of those challenges in pharma and non-AI medtech. I look forward to kind of working with innovators in this space to address those. Next slide, please, Lou. So the award itself is structured across 4 phases, which describe increasing levels of maturity of the technology. In phase 1, we provide grants of up to £150,000 for technologies where there's an existing algorithm that's looking to do some initial feasibility testing. And as we kind of move through the phases, we end up in phases 3 and 4, where we talk about real world evidence generation of deploying technologies prospectively into pathways and understanding how the technology works, not just on pure accuracy terms, but also in terms of integration into a workflow, and ultimately how it leads to outcomes for patients and clinicians throughout that workflow. So in phase 4, which is the kind of the most mature end of our pipeline, we'll fund multi-year, multi-site, large-scale research trials that we hope will generate gold standard evidence for the technology companies. And then phase 5 is outside of the award and not funded by us, but talks about our ambition to support people after phase 4 to gain a footing at scale within the NHS, whether that be through some kind of national procurement or through working really closely with AHSN partners and other local delivery partners. And then moving on, please, Lou. So this slide just gives a snapshot of some of the work that we funded to date, and basically shows across all the regions of the UK, in Scotland, in Wales, unfortunately not yet in Northern Ireland, but hopefully that will come. We're funding trials that are happening now on the ground, and it just shows the breadth of interest in this area and the availability of NHS collaboration sites to those on this call who may be looking for suitable research partners for work you have upcoming. And my team would be very happy to broker any introductions if they're necessary, possibly through the AHSNs, who obviously know their local patches better than we do in the centre. And then moving on, Lou. Oh, that's me done.
Thank you very much, Dan. Sorry about that. I couldn't move my cursor quickly enough. And I think there will be many innovators that have either applied or looking to apply for the NHSX funding. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that then all of the panelists can be viewed slightly larger. And then we can start to see if there are any questions. So I'd like to just open it out to the audience for any questions that you would like to have addressed from what you've heard from the panel. There's such a huge breadth of experience here, and please do, as I said right at the start, put the thumbs up or whatever it is, the upvote for questions that you particularly favour, because that will then help us to prioritise those. And we've got a good hour to have quite a lot of discussion. So I think what I would like to do is I'll start with a couple in no particular order, but I guess really we can't. Oh, thank you, Chris. You started, but no, I'm going to go to the questions. In fact, so we've got a question particularly for Dan. How exactly do you define value for money when assessing AI award applications? You're on mute. Sorry, Dan.
Apologies. So what we do is we sort of think about it slightly differently for the 4 different phases of the award, and we give indicative financial envelopes of what we invite people to apply for in terms of scale of the ambition. If I talk about, I'll pick one of the phases. So phase 3, which is a phase saying technologies to date haven't deployed and generated evidence in the operational environment, but they've got success in the lab environment, proving their technology is accurate in terms of sort of retrospective studies. What we would say is we would look